Good morrow, Ashers. Great news, I finally got a real microphone, and my audio quality will only be getting better from now on. This is why you have not heard from me in the last 2 weeks. I've been waiting for the mic to arrive, and the camera, of course, which is for streaming. This video is the first in a mini-series covering the design pillars that Ashes of Creation is being built on. So subscribe if you want to hear more about my thoughts and ideas on this very intricate subject. As per usual, there's very little footage around the game at the moment, so my plan is to just put some filler up and maybe something relevant to the actual things I'm talking about, even if it isn't necessarily from Ashes of Creation, obviously. There are 5 design pillars Intrepid is building Ashes of Creation on. These are engaging and immersive story, a reactive world, player interaction, player agency, and risk versus reward. Obviously, this will be the ones I'll be talking about in this mini-series, but needless to say, let's talk about the first one. Engaging and immersive story. A mountainous task to be sure, but a welcome one if Steven's Dungeon Master skills are anything to go by. I half expected the game to initially be very limited in lore and narrative. The game's very design of a player-driven world meant that having a cohesive story and narrative would be a really tough sell to implement at the end of the day. Thankfully, with the 24-hour Extra Life live stream giving us an early lore reveal, as limited as it may have been, it seems that Intrepid is revealing that lore and story is something that they have been thinking about since the very early stages of development, and is clearly a cornerstone of their design, which means they have to deliver since it is a primary focus. There are quite a few challenges involved with doing this properly, and I'll be jumping into the kind of challenges and solutions that they could implement to make this work. Chief among these challenges that Intrepid will face in creating an immersive and engaging story is that there will be no voice acting at launch as of right now. Without voice acting, the world of Vera could very well end up feeling empty and lifeless. People have a tendency to not want to read quest dialogue, and a world without ambient voice dialogue could potentially be a big detriment to the immersion that players experience. Since I really dislike stating a problem or a challenge and not providing a potential solution goes against my very nature, so my 2 solutions to this issue are pretty simple but could potentially be great ideas that they could implement. The first and probably best solution is to have the story be told in a narrator fashion. So someone, Morgan Freeman, please Morgan Freeman, just kidding, he's expensive, is told by a narrator as the player is actually completing content. Don't force them to stand still, obviously. You really want players to actually go and do content while listening to this narration as the story is completed. By doing so, you could potentially really create a situation where players are absorbing the story as they play in a more natural fashion, which is probably the best delivery method that I've seen in most games. Obviously, this still requires a slight form of audio recording and voice acting to a limited degree, but at least not every NPC or interaction needs to be done that way. Instead, it's a single actor or a single voice actor that's going to record the primary story dialogues throughout the game, just telling it to you as a player. This is a happy middle ground for me. I'd prefer full-blown voice acting, but since the budget does not allow that as stated by Intrepid themselves, this is a happy middle ground. Another alternative, which would most definitely be cheaper, is to have players be forced in a way to read text in some form to progress the story, by selecting the right dialogue options or having a random kind of puzzle or quiz where hints are given by the NPCs that you talk to, like the quest givers, to completely enter a dungeon or open a door or solve any kind of puzzles. Obviously, this forces players a little bit and could create a little bit of frustration when people don't actually go and read that text. So it is something that should be in quite a bit of moderation, and also should be made pretty clear when you accept the quest that the NPC needs to be paid attention to. The second solution also relies heavily on how well written and engaging the story and dialogue is, which brings me to my next challenge Intrepid will be facing: the seeming lack of a dedicated writer on the Intrepid team. While it is obvious that Steven has some significant talent in crafting a story, having a dedicated writer for a game makes a huge difference in the quality and continuity of the story. Crafting a narrative is, after all, a specialized field that requires creativity, understanding of pacing, coherency, and a ridiculous amount of passion and talent, as well as a ridiculous amount of time, which I'm sure Steven is very short of, considering he has hands in every single pie in Intrepid. I might be wrong on this subject because I haven't seen any appointments or advertisements for a dedicated writer, but I feel like this is something that they have to consider doing at this moment, because having someone involved from moment one on the story is kind of what you need. That person has to have a passion for the lore, for the world, to make a story that we as players can enjoy and is coherent for obvious reasons. The final challenge is, how do you deliver story in a world that is primarily player driven? Content will be locked behind node progression and how large amounts of players choose to progress their server within the world. How do you lead players when they need to go to experience a story? Are quests and story segments to a localized area and node? What do new players experience in terms of story? Is the story soloable, and repeating them, does that provide an additional reward? Imagine a new player entering the world and this story is not something they can complete because no one else is doing the story anymore, and as a result they need a group, but nobody's willing to do it. With these points in mind, I think the best delivery method for story is going to be dungeons and discoverable collectibles like books or tomes of some kind found throughout the world. Having dungeons be the primary method of story delivery fixes the issue where players aren't completing content or able to complete content because they'll be doing them for the other rewards or farming or whatever the case may be. And in the dungeon, the lore should be provided by either a narrator, like I mentioned previously, as well as books that you can collect and view after the fact or clearing the dungeon specifically. You don't want players interacting with a book in the dungeon while there's a whole bunch of mobs going on, or other players are looking to kill you to take your farming spot at the end of the day. So these should be entered into like a journal, so to speak, so players can go and read them after the fact in a coherent manner. As for directing players to content, NPCs in towns or wherever could obviously direct you towards content with simple quests, but instead I would like to see a lot of more hidden quest lines that can be discovered. For example, having an NPC dialogue just randomly talk or mention a mysterious forest or disappearances within a mine shaft or something along those lines that makes players go and investigate what's going on there. And once you walk in, you discover a book or a note written to a lover, and that lover says that he's going deeper into the dungeon to go and find a locket for his wife, or whatever the case may be. That kind of more natural progression makes people read the dialogue, which hits another point of importance there, but also makes the world feel a little bit more alive than just here is a question mark where you can collect a quest, here's an exclamation mark where you can complete a quest. It's a little bit more in depth and a little bit more, actually a lot more, immersive as a result. And finally, just like Intrepid is experiencing challenges in creating the game, players should face significant challenges within the game. It should not be a cakewalk to complete content. If a player is never under threat and content is too easily cleared, then the world feels too theme parky, and the player is just along for the ride. This is probably the easiest way to kill immersion for me. I want and need a challenge to feel immersed and engage. Each fight should have mechanics to figure out and overcome. Whether it's well-timed CC or controlling the boss that you're fighting specifically so he does not wipe your group in a specific way with aggro, whatever the case may be, the game has to have mechanics. Please, Intrepid, it has to have mechanics to figure out. It is very important for immersion and engagement. With the challenges out of the way, I just want to make 2 quick suggestions on how to help a little bit when it comes to immersion and engagement in the game. First of all, the journal that I was talking about earlier needs to be something that is in the game in a fashion where anybody can go and relive their story achievements or story progression in a text or even narrative fashion. Just repeat the narration like I suggested. It could potentially be something that you have to fill out as you play along. So you've got, let's say, 10 storylines within 10 different nodes, and each node can be progressed, or storyline inside a node could be progressed, and that fills out your journal. This adds a bit of achievement and interesting and revisiting of the lore and story, making it a little bit more synced in, for lack of a better word. I know synced in isn't really a thing, but yeah. My last suggestion is having a bestiary actual volume that you can interact with. As monsters in the world are encountered, these get added to the bestiary, and even if you discover a weakness or a strength of a monster, helping you to counter them for future reference, or even a mechanic of a dungeon or raid boss, could mean that people feel like they want to progress their information inside their bestiary, making it really an engaging mechanic. Not so much immersive, but engaging nonetheless. Hell, ideally I would love to see dungeon and raid bosses appear in the bestiary as a way for players to get a player guide with tips on how to beat an encounter, making them also able to make the game harder. This way, content can be more engaging because everyone contains or has a way to see the mechanics and eventually learn from them in a in-game fashion rather than looking at outside sources, adding to the immersion factor. Cool, that about wraps up our video for today. I am a little bit unhappy with the length of this video. I was hoping to keep it under 10 minutes. Needless to say, I hope you guys enjoyed the content. I'll be covering one of the next design pillars, maybe 2, inside the next week's video. So subscribe and like this video if you really enjoyed the content. I'm hoping to become a CC, as in content creator, officially with Intrepid Studios. So I need to grow quite a bit because of that. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments below. What could I work on? My mic still has a bit of an echo on it, so any suggestions are welcome. Yeah, guys, have an awesome week and see you next time. May Ashes be amazing.